So let's dive into the spec maps. So just to clean things up, I just deleted the other two folders, so we just have the original base color, because that's what we're going to be working from. And I'm going to just rename this, called base spec. Ordinarily I would just duplicate the layer, but just to keep things simple, we're going to leave it like this. So from here, I'm going to get rid of some of the color variation that we've done. We don't need it anymore, since this is going to be a spec map, and it won't fight us later on. And these are okay here, so I'm going to actually leave this as is. So we're going to add a luminosity, so it'll turn everything gray, which is what we want. And then from here I'm going to do a levels. So for the spec map, this is one of the most important maps, in my opinion, for anything that you're painting, because it's the only map that can read from a distance. So you can have the craziest level of detail in the displacement map and the craziest level of detail in the color maps, but the second it goes to mid to foreground visibility, you lose all sense of detail. However, with specular maps, you can still maintain the indication of what is shiny and what isn't, even from very far distances. So it's a very powerful map to use and to have. So for the base spec, we're going to be doing two different spec maps. We're going to do a primary spec map and a secondary spec map. Essentially, it's going to be the general specularity and the shininess of the skin, and then we're going to have a second map that dictates where the oily areas and the shinier areas of the face are going to be. So for now, we're going to focus on the primary one, and we're just going to start changing levels a bit. And the key here is we want to try to get a good range from white to black, just so there's information for the shaders to play with. Something like that. So we're getting good range from light to dark. However, there's some problem areas where it's going too dark around the lips and the ears and the eyebrows. In fact, we want the eyebrows to be the opposite. Actually, no, I take that back. We're going to do the opposite for the secondary spec. For this spec map, we want to kind of darken them down. We're going to have to change that as well. But this is a good starting point for the spec map. Like so. So let's take some of this back out for those problem areas. Especially around the eyes. And the ears, I'm going to do a paint through, like so. Or I can just go directly to the UV tab. I can see it here and I can paint it out. Up to you. Like so. There, that's a bit better. And then for the mouth. I want her to have glossy lips, so I'm not too terribly concerned in this map with the contrast. I may dial some of it back in, but I'm just trying to get it a bit brighter. Than the skin. Like so. There. So this is a good jumping off point for the initial, tone some of this back, for the initial spec maps. Usually you'll see people painting the lips, the nose, the eyelids, and the forehead and the ears in this map a lot brighter. We are going to do a little bit of that, but we're going to really rely on that secondary spec map to dictate some of those oily areas. But it does help to accent it in this map a bit. So I'm going to add another levels. I'll call this just brighten that up just a tad. We're going to start painting it in just ever so slightly in certain areas. Just to pick it up a bit more. And then lastly in the ears. Again, it's just super subtle, nothing crazy. And this is a really good base for my base spec. I notice the neck's a little bit lighter. I don't necessarily want, because you're seeing the darkening in the face a bit. So we're actually going to lighten that up. In fact, sorry, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to actually darken down the rest of the neck. Just so the neck's not shinier than the face. I'm going to unlock all. I'm just doing a paint through. Like so. That's a bit better. I'm not worried about the stuff down here. Typically they'll have clothing on, so you won't have to worry about that. I'm just worried more about the head. So this feels a bit better. So this is roughly what your base spec map will look like. I'm actually going to paint some of this out in the nose. For that mole. Just so we get a little bit of a kick on it. We don't want it to be shining bright, but just so it's in the same level as the rest of the face. That'll be good. So from here, you'll see that there are different other freckles and stuff on the face. Depending on the skin, I would probably, you'll have to look back at the reference, but you may want to paint some of this stuff out, which we can easily do here. I'll show you an example. I can just go back to the base skin and then using the clone stamp, organic brush, just paint some of this out. So that way it's not a direct representation of the color maps, and it starts adding a bit more complexity when you put everything together. So all the moles and the freckles don't go super dark. Oh, actually I left paint through on. I'm going to have to undo that. Sorry there, Maury actually crashed on me, so I've just reloaded. So what I was saying earlier is about painting out some of these freckles. Let's go and do this again. And what's nice about this whole layering system is I can paint directly into the original color map and not worry about having to re-level and regrade things. Very easy. So we're getting some of those freckles out. So they don't show up in the other maps. Sorry, they don't show up in the final renders. So when you're painting skin, have a look at your reference. And usually you don't get a good enough reference to tell how the freckles are working, because some freckles do actually shine a little bit brighter. So just try to make an artistic decision, judgment call. And that's pretty good. And I had to redo some of this work, so I have to go back and do this brightness again for the neck. Like so. Just even that out a bit. Good. So this is what our base spec map should look like, roughly. So from here, let's talk about the secondary spec. Now, for the oiliness, a lot of times people will just paint. Let's actually do a new layer. And we're going to fill this with black. Let's try this again. There we go. So when people are painting the quote-unquote oil or secondary spec map, a lot of times people will just take a white brush with a white soft brush and just paint it in like so in these areas. So you get the brighter areas on the cheeks, in the eyes, the nose, lips, chin, ears, forehead. I've found that it isn't enough just to have a gradient map like this on the face. We do need to have some pore detail in there, or else it's going to look too shiny, it's going to look wet more than it does look oily. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this as a basis. So I'm going to duplicate this map here. And I'm going to merge all of this stuff. Like so. So this is one of the bugs that I've experienced in Mari in these alpha versions in terms of merging. Turns everything to black. So let's just work around that. We're going to leave everything as is for this. We're going to call this a spec secondary. And what we want to do is have this map as basically like we would have in a mask diffuse material shader module. We want to have this. We want to have a mask driving the visibility of this. So we're going to put this layer inside here at the bottom on black. I'm going to see how much of this I can actually merge. Maybe merging all that stuff at once isn't a good idea. Nope, that didn't work either. Okay, so let's improvise here. We're going to go to the Channels tab and duplicate this channel. And then in here I'm going to flatten. So everything in this channel will flatten and look like this. So if we go into the layers, we have this map here, which is originally what we wanted. I'm going to cut this, just Control X, go back to my original color, Control V. And now I have my map that I want, and I'm going to delete that. Create a new layer that I'm going to fill with black. Like so. And then in this layer, I'm going to call it base spec secondary, just an arbitrary name, and then I'm going to have a mask that's going to hide this. I'm going to take a soft paintbrush and paint in some of the oil areas. Like so. This is super subtle because it's a very strong effect. So we don't want to go overboard with it. But this is going to supplement nicely with our primary spec map. I'm going to go into the Ortho UV tab, clean this up a bit. like so. And then find these areas and fill them in. That should be fine. Actually, let's take it down slightly. Like so. There. Let's move on to the lips. I'm just blocking it in the Ortho UV tab, and then I'm going to fill in the rest of the seams here and clean it up. Again, we don't want too much, but just a slight. Tone to it. And then we're going to do the eyes. Let's lock unselected. Usually it's pretty oily up here inside the face, and slightly bleeding down. Just do the same on this side. And allowing the base spec to drive a lot of this is really going to give some really nice results when we start going into applying this map to the face and in the context of a shader. And for the ear, I'm just worried about trying to get the inside of this ear where all that oil happens. Like so. And then last touch is just to add ever so slight kick on the T-zone cheek area. Forehead. And the chin. Like so. So this is what our secondary spec map is going to look like. It's going to give this really nice breakup of oiliness on the face. That's going to be a supplement to this map. So that's how I do the spec maps for the face. Next, we're going to move on to another important map, and that's going to be painting the displacement maps.